They laughed because of what they could see, never realizing the most powerful man in the room had already seen something far more valuable. On a cool Friday evening in downtown Chicago, the crystal chandeliers of Belladonna Steakhouse cast a warm golden glow across polished marble floors, sparkling wine glasses, and perfectly pressed designer suits. Every table seemed filled with people who measured worth by appearances, and every whispered conversation blended into the elegant soundtrack of clinking silverware and soft piano music. Moving carefully between them was Savannah Brooks, balancing a heavy serving tray with practiced confidence despite spending nearly 10 hours on her feet. Her black apron fit neatly over her white shirt, and her warm smile remained steady even after another exhausting double shift. Savannah knew people noticed her long before they learned her name. Some noticed her because she was one of the few black waitresses working in one of Chicago's most exclusive restaurants. Others noticed the graceful confidence she carried despite having a curvy figure that often attracted rude comments from strangers who believed kindness was optional. She had learned years ago that people would always have opinions, but they could never decide who she became. She greeted every customer with the same gentle respect her late grandmother had taught her, believing dignity was something you carried inside, not something others could hand to you. Across the dining room, laughter suddenly erupted from a table near the center. A group of sharply dressed guests exchanged amused glances as Savannah approached with their meals. One woman looked her up and down with a smirk that spread quickly around the table. Another guest whispered something just loud enough for everyone nearby to hear, and several people burst into laughter before Savannah had even placed the first plate on the table. Her hands never shook. Her smile never disappeared. Only the faint pause in her breathing revealed that every word had landed exactly where cruel words always landed. Around them, dozens of diners noticed what was happening. Some lowered their eyes. Others pretended to be fascinated by their menus. No one spoke. No one interrupted. At the far corner of the restaurant, partially hidden beneath the soft glow of an antique wall lamp, a man in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit quietly watched everything unfold. Vincent Moretti had entered the restaurant 15 minutes earlier without fanfare, accompanied by only one discreet security advisor who remained several steps behind. To everyone else, he appeared to be another wealthy businessman enjoying a private dinner. No one recognized that he owned investments stretching across half the city or that his reputation caused powerful executives to choose their words carefully whenever his name entered a conversation. Vincent had spent years observing people before revealing himself. He believed true character appeared only when no one thought they were being judged. As another burst of laughter echoed through the dining room, his blue eyes remained fixed not on the people mocking Savannah, but on the quiet strength with which she continued serving them. Without taking a single bite of the untouched meal before him, Vincent asked one calm question that only his security advisor could hear. Who hired her? The security advisor glanced discreetly across the dining room before answering in a voice barely louder than the soft jazz drifting through the restaurant. Her name is Savannah Brooks. She has been here almost 11 months. Never late. Never a complaint from the kitchen. Customers usually ask for her by name. Vincent did not respond immediately. Instead, he watched Savannah thank the very people who had embarrassed her only moments earlier before collecting their empty appetizer plates with the same quiet professionalism she offered every table. There was no bitterness on her face, only a calm determination that seemed almost impossible in a room where kindness had become so rare. Most people mistook silence for weakness. Vincent had spent his entire life learning that silence often required the greatest strength. Across the restaurant, Savannah disappeared through the swinging kitchen doors, finally allowing herself one slow breath before reaching the service station. The smile she had worn for the dining room faded for only a second. She rested both hands against the stainless steel counter, closed her eyes, and whispered the same words she repeated every difficult shift. Just keep going. It was not optimism. It was survival. 3 years earlier, her life had looked completely different. She had been studying hospitality management at a community college while helping care for her widowed mother, Lorraine Brooks, whose chronic heart condition had forced her to leave her job as an elementary school secretary. Medical bills arrived faster than paychecks, and scholarships never covered groceries, rent, prescriptions, and utilities all at once. Savannah quietly left school before her second year, promising herself that one day she would return after life became more stable. That day had never come. Instead, she worked wherever honest work could be found. Morning shifts at a neighborhood bakery, evening shifts at Belladonna Steakhouse, weekend catering events whenever someone called in sick. Nearly 70 hours every week disappeared into work, but she never complained because every paycheck meant another month her mother could remain comfortably at home instead of worrying about choosing between medicine and electricity. Even after endless double shifts, Savannah still found time every Sunday afternoon to visit the neighborhood community center, serving free meals alongside retired volunteers who reminded her of her grandmother. She believed that difficult seasons should never become excuses to stop showing compassion. Very few people knew any of this. Customers only saw a cheerful waitress carrying heavy trays with remarkable balance. They never saw the bus ride home after midnight, the stack of unpaid textbooks stored beneath her bed, or the handwritten calendar where every dollar had already been assigned before it reached her bank account. The restaurant manager, Daniel Mercer, entered the service station carrying a tablet. His expression revealed more irritation than concern. "Table 14 says service is too slow," he said without looking up. "Try smiling a little more. Happy customers leave better reviews." Savannah nodded. Politely, "Yes, sir." She could have explained that Table 14 had requested 3 separate changes to every entree. She could have mentioned that she was covering 2 sections because another server had called out sick. She could have defended herself. Instead, she simply picked up another tray. Excuses rarely changed hearts. As she pushed open the kitchen doors once again, Vincent watched her return to the dining room with the same quiet grace she had carried all evening. His advisor noticed the thoughtful expression crossing his face. "Is something wrong, sir?" Vincent slowly shook his head without taking his eyes off Savannah. "No," he answered softly. "Something is finally becoming very clear." The dinner rush reached its peak as every table filled with polished glasses, expensive watches, and conversations about business deals, vacations, and celebrations. Belladonna Steakhouse had become louder, yet the music somehow made every insult feel even sharper. Savannah carried another tray through the narrow aisle with effortless balance, greeting each guest with the same warm smile that never asked for admiration, only basic respect. At table 12, the same group that had laughed earlier had ordered another round of drinks along with an extravagant dessert presentation. As Savannah carefully arranged the plates before them, one man leaned back in his chair and smiled with obvious amusement. "You know," he said loudly enough for neighboring tables to hear, "this place keeps getting more interesting. I ordered cheesecake, but I think the restaurant already hired someone who sampled the whole menu." A few uncomfortable chuckles spread through the room before another woman at the table laughed even harder. "Maybe management thinks customers tip better when they feel guilty," she added, making no effort to lower her voice. The words drifted across nearby tables like smoke. Forks paused halfway to plates. Conversation slowed. A young couple exchanged uneasy glances while an older gentleman quietly lowered his eyes toward his coffee cup. Savannah stood completely still for a single heartbeat. She had heard comments like these before. Different cities, different uniforms, different faces. The words always changed, but the intention never did. She inhaled slowly, refusing to let humiliation steal the professionalism she had worked so hard to build. "I hope your desserts are exactly as you requested," she answered gently. "Please let me know if there is anything else I can do for your table." Instead of ending the moment, her calm response seemed to encourage them. Another guest lifted his phone, pretending to frame a picture before laughing. "Come on," he joked. "Stand next to the cake. This will be hilarious." More laughter followed. Savannah felt dozens of eyes resting on her, some curious, some sympathetic, many simply relieved that someone else had become the target. She chose not to look at any of them. Quietly, she reached for the empty appetizer plates and prepared to leave. Before she could take another step, Daniel Mercer appeared beside the table with the polished smile he reserved for wealthy customers. "Is everything all right this evening?" he asked. The man with the phone grinned. "Everything is perfect except your waitress seems a little sensitive. We are only having fun." Daniel glanced toward Savannah instead of the guests. His expression carried silent frustration. "Savannah," he said in a controlled voice, "our priority is making every guest feel comfortable. If there has been any misunderstanding, Perhaps you should apologize so everyone can enjoy the rest of their evening. The dining room became painfully quiet. Savannah looked at her manager for several seconds, searching his face for even the smallest sign that he might defend her dignity. She found none. There was only concern for customer satisfaction, online reviews, and avoiding conflict. A familiar ache settled deep inside her chest, but she refused to let bitterness reach her eyes. She folded her hands neatly in front of her apron. "I am sorry if anything I did affected your dining experience," she said softly. The guests smiled with satisfaction, believing they had won. Across the restaurant, Vincent Moretti slowly placed his linen napkin beside his untouched dinner plate. His expression remained calm, almost unreadable, but his advisor immediately recognized the subtle change. Vincent had stopped observing. He had started deciding. Vincent remained seated, but the silence around his table seemed heavier than the conversations filling the restaurant. His security advisor waited for an instruction that never came. Instead, Vincent continued watching Savannah as she thanked the guests once more and quietly carried the empty plates away. "Why are we waiting?" the advisor finally asked. Vincent answered without looking away. "Because I want to know whether anyone in this room still remembers what respect looks like." The advisor followed his gaze across the dining room. A retired couple exchanged disappointed looks, but remained seated. A young businessman shifted uncomfortably before returning to his phone. Two women whispered to each other, obviously disturbed by what they had witnessed, yet neither stood to defend the waitress who had just been publicly humiliated. Every person had found a reason to stay silent. Vincent slowly nodded to himself as though an invisible question had just been answered. Meanwhile, Savannah stepped through the kitchen doors carrying the stack of dishes with steady hands. Only after placing them carefully into the service station did she allow the smile to disappear from her face. Her reflection stared back at her from the polished stainless steel cabinet. She noticed the faint redness around her eyes and immediately splashed cool water onto her wrists instead of her face. She refused to let customers see tears. Tears never paid bills. Tears never filled prescriptions. She reached into the pocket of her apron and unfolded a small photograph that had softened around the edges from years of being carried everywhere. It showed her standing beside her mother on the front porch of their modest brick home, both of them laughing as autumn leaves covered the lawn. On the back, written in neat handwriting, were the words Lorraine had given her before her first restaurant job. "Never let another person's opinion become your mirror." Savannah traced the sentence gently with her thumb before slipping the photograph back into her pocket. "I am trying, Mom," she whispered. With a quiet smile, the kitchen timer rang, snapping everyone back into motion. Orders continued arriving. Plates continued leaving the pass. Life inside the restaurant never paused for anyone's heartbreak. One of the younger cooks walked beside Savannah while preparing another tray. "You did not deserve that," he said softly. She thanked him with a grateful smile. Neither did a lot of people who still chose kindness anyway. Before he could answer, Daniel Mercer appeared once again, clipboard tucked beneath his arm. "Table 12 wants fresh coffee," he said. "Please make sure they leave tonight with a positive impression." Savannah looked at him calmly. There was no anger in her voice, only quiet disappointment. "Of course." Daniel hesitated for a moment as though realizing how cold his earlier decision had sounded, but the moment quickly passed. "Good," he replied before walking away toward the hostess stand. Savannah lifted the coffee pot and straightened her apron one more time. Every instinct inside her wanted to avoid that table, yet she walked toward it with the same measured grace she had shown all evening. She believed that character was revealed not during easy moments, but during unfair ones. Across the dining room, Vincent slowly rose from his chair. The movement was subtle, but the atmosphere shifted almost instantly. Nearby conversations faded. His security advisor stood as well, instinctively taking one step behind him. Vincent adjusted the cuff of his charcoal jacket and began walking across the marble floor with calm, deliberate steps, his eyes fixed only on Savannah. No one knew why the distinguished stranger had left his table. Within seconds, every pair of eyes in Belladonna Steakhouse followed him, and a silence deeper than embarrassment settled over the entire room. Savannah slowed her pace as she approached table 12 with the fresh coffee pot balanced carefully in one hand. The laughter that had filled the dining room only moments earlier had faded into an uneasy silence, replaced by dozens of curious eyes following the tall stranger crossing the marble floor. She had no idea who he was. To her, he was simply another distinguished guest dressed in an impeccably tailored charcoal suit whose calm expression revealed nothing. Vincent Moretti stopped only a few feet away from her. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. Savannah lowered her eyes respectfully, assuming he wished to make a request about his meal. "Good evening, sir," she said gently. "May I help you with anything?" Vincent studied her face, noticing that although her smile remained polite, there was a quiet sadness hidden behind it. More remarkable than her composure was the complete absence of resentment. She had every reason to be angry, yet she refused to let cruelty define her character. That alone told him more about her than any background report ever could. "You have already helped more people than you realize," he answered calmly. Savannah looked slightly confused. "I am sorry, sir. I do not understand." Vincent gave the faintest smile. "No," he replied. "You simply have not realized that some people are still paying attention." Around them, conversations stopped completely. Even the piano player hesitated before quietly lowering his hands from the keys. Daniel Mercer noticed the growing crowd of attention and hurried across the restaurant, forcing an anxious smile onto his face. "Good evening, sir," he interrupted. "I hope everything has been satisfactory with your dining experience. Is there anything our staff can do for you?" Vincent turned toward him with the same measured calm. "Actually," he said, "there is." Daniel straightened immediately. "Anything at all?" Vincent nodded toward Savannah without taking his eyes off the manager. "I would like to know why your finest employee was expected to apologize for the behavior of your guests." Daniel's confident expression faltered. "Sir, I was simply trying to keep the atmosphere pleasant for everyone." Vincent allowed several seconds of silence before speaking again. "Pleasant for everyone," he repeated quietly. Interesting choice of words. The manager shifted uncomfortably as nearby diners listened without pretending otherwise. Savannah instinctively stepped back, hoping the uncomfortable exchange would end before creating additional trouble. She had spent years avoiding conflict, believing that drawing attention only made difficult situations worse. "Sir," she said softly, "please do not worry about me. I am all right." Vincent turned toward her once more. "Miss Brooks," he said with genuine respect, "that is exactly what concerns me." Savannah blinked in surprise. She had never introduced herself. Before she could ask how he knew her name, Vincent continued. "Sometimes the strongest people become so accustomed to carrying unfair burdens that everyone else begins expecting them to carry even more." His words settled over the dining room with remarkable weight. Several guests lowered their eyes, remembering exactly what they had witnessed only minutes earlier. The group at table 12 exchanged nervous glances, suddenly realizing that the quiet stranger standing beside the waitress possessed an authority that had nothing to do with raising his voice. Vincent took one calm step closer to Savannah, his expression warm with sincere admiration rather than spectacle, silently preparing to make a gesture that would remind every person in Belladonna Steakhouse what genuine respect looked like. For one long, breathless moment, no one in Belladonna Steakhouse moved. Savannah looked at Vincent with quiet confusion, unsure why a stranger was defending her with such unwavering conviction. She instinctively took half a step backward, but Vincent simply offered a reassuring smile that carried neither pity nor arrogance. It was the kind of expression that acknowledged another person's worth without asking anything in return. Then, with slow and unmistakable respect, he gently reached for her hand. His movements were deliberate, giving her every opportunity to pull away if she felt uncomfortable. Savannah searched his eyes, finding only kindness and calm assurance. She did not sense humiliation. She did not sense performance. She saw genuine respect. She gave the smallest nod. Vincent carefully lifted her hand and placed a brief, respectful kiss across her knuckles, a timeless gesture of honor that instantly transformed the atmosphere of the entire restaurant. The room fell completely silent. Crystal glasses remained suspended in midair. Conversations disappeared. Even the servers standing near the kitchen entrance forgot the trays they were carrying. The gesture lasted only a second, yet it carried more weight than every cruel word spoken that evening. Vincent released her hand immediately and turned toward the dining room. His voice remained calm, never rising above a confident conversational tone, Yet every person heard each word with perfect clarity. A person's dignity is never determined by the opinions of strangers, he said. It is revealed by the way they choose to treat others, especially when those others have nothing to offer them in return. No one interrupted him. The guests at table 12 lowered their eyes, suddenly finding their untouched desserts far more interesting than the woman they had mocked only minutes before. Daniel Mercer stood frozen beside the service station, realizing that the attention of the entire restaurant had shifted away from wealth, appearances, and expensive clothing towards something much more difficult to ignore. Vincent continued speaking. This young woman carried herself with more grace under pressure than most executives I have met in boardrooms worth hundreds of millions of dollars. While others chose ridicule, she chose professionalism. While others searched for flaws, she continued serving them with respect. If that is not strength, then I do not know what strength is. Savannah felt warmth rising to her cheeks, overwhelmed not by embarrassment, but by the unfamiliar experience of someone recognizing her character instead of judging her appearance. She quietly whispered, "Thank you, sir, but you really did not have to do this." Vincent looked at her with the same composed expression. "Yes," he answered gently. "I did. Because silence rewards cruelty, and respect deserves witnesses." Those words settled over the dining room like a quiet promise. Several diners who had remained silent during the earlier humiliation now looked visibly ashamed. An elderly couple near the window smiled warmly at Savannah, while a young mother gently squeezed her daughter's shoulder as if hoping she would remember this moment for years to come. Vincent then faced Daniel Mercer once again. "I believe every business eventually reveals its true values," he said evenly. "Not during its busiest nights or its highest profits, but during the moments when someone vulnerable needs to know whether they matter." Daniel swallowed nervously, unable to find a response. For the first time that evening, the balance of the room had completely changed. The people who had laughed now wished no one was watching them at all. The silence lingered long after Vincent's final words settled over the dining room. It was no longer the uneasy silence of spectators avoiding responsibility. It was the unmistakable quiet that follows the moment truth enters a room. Daniel Mercer forced an awkward smile, hoping to restore a sense of normalcy before the evening slipped completely beyond his control. "Sir," he began carefully, "I assure you this was simply an unfortunate misunderstanding. We value every member of our staff." Vincent regarded him for several seconds before replying. "Do you?" he asked calmly. "Because values are not demonstrated through speeches. They are demonstrated through decisions." Daniel felt every pair of eyes turn toward him once again. His rehearsed confidence disappeared. He remembered asking Savannah to apologize. He remembered choosing customer satisfaction over simple fairness. There was no explanation that could erase what everyone had witnessed. Meanwhile, the guests at table 12 shifted uneasily in their seats. The man who had made the first cruel remark quietly placed his phone face down on the table. The woman who had laughed the loudest suddenly found herself unable to meet Savannah's eyes. They had expected the evening to end with harmless entertainment and another expensive dinner. Instead, they had become the example everyone else would remember. Vincent's security advisor stepped closer and handed him a slim leather portfolio. Vincent opened it briefly before closing it again. "Mr. Mercer," he said, "how long have you managed this restaurant?" "Almost 5 years," Daniel answered. "Then you should know something about the company that owns it." Daniel hesitated. "Of course. Moretti Hospitality Group acquired the property last year." Vincent gave a slight nod. "Correct." A puzzled expression crossed Daniel's face before his eyes slowly widened. He looked from the elegant portfolio to the security advisor, then back to the composed man standing beside Savannah. Color drained from his face as recognition finally replaced confusion. "Mr. Moretti," he whispered. Several nearby employees looked at one another in disbelief. The name traveled across the dining room in hushed voices. Guests who had not recognized him moments earlier suddenly understood why his presence carried such quiet authority. Moretti Hospitality Group owned luxury hotels, restaurants, and resorts across the country. Vincent was known throughout the industry for demanding exceptional service, but even more for insisting that respect within his businesses was never optional. Savannah looked at Vincent in complete surprise. She had served his table earlier without realizing who he was. She remembered his simple dinner order, his polite thank you, and the untouched tray that still rested on his table. Nothing about him had suggested he possessed the authority to reshape everyone's future with a single decision. Vincent turned toward her with the same calm expression. "Miss Brooks," he said, "you treated me with dignity before you knew my name. That tells me everything I need to know about your character." Savannah lowered her eyes modestly. "I was only doing my job." Vincent smiled gently. "No, you were honoring your principles. There is a difference." Around them, several employees quietly nodded in agreement. For the first time that evening, Savannah was no longer being seen through the lens of her appearance. She was being recognized for her integrity, her resilience, and her unwavering kindness. And as that realization spread through Belladonna Steakhouse, everyone understood that the evening was far from over. The most important decisions had only just begun. No one applauded. No one celebrated. The dignity of the moment demanded something quieter. Vincent closed the leather portfolio and handed it back to his advisor before looking around the dining room one final time. "Every successful business eventually faces a simple choice," he said. "Protect appearances or protect principles. Only one of those choices lasts." His words settled over the restaurant with remarkable calm. Daniel Mercer lowered his head, finally understanding that no carefully rehearsed explanation could undo the example he had set for every employee under his supervision. Vincent addressed him without anger. "Beginning tomorrow morning, the regional director will conduct a complete review of this location. Leadership is measured by the courage to protect people when it is inconvenient, not when it is easy. Tonight, you failed that responsibility." Daniel nodded silently. There was no argument left to make because the entire restaurant had witnessed the truth unfold with their own eyes. Vincent then turned toward the guests at table 12. His expression remained composed, free of resentment. "I hope this evening reminds all of us that humor built upon another person's dignity is never truly harmless." The man who had mocked Savannah stood slowly from his chair. His confidence had disappeared completely. "Miss Brooks," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology. My words were disrespectful, and I was wrong." The woman beside him also stood. I joined the laughter instead of stopping it. "I am sorry." Savannah looked at each of them with the same calm grace that had carried her through the evening. She could have answered with bitterness. She could have reminded them how deeply their words had hurt. Instead, she offered a gentle smile. "Thank you for saying that," she replied. "I hope we all leave here treating people a little better than we did when we arrived." Her response surprised nearly everyone in the room. Forgiveness, offered without self-righteousness, often carried greater strength than revenge ever could. Several diners quietly began clapping, not because anyone had asked them to, but because they recognized genuine character standing before them. The applause remained respectful rather than overwhelming, filling the restaurant with something that had been absent all evening: hope. Vincent looked toward the staff gathered near the kitchen entrance. "Miss Brooks," he said, "if you are willing, I would like you to meet with my executive team next week. Our hospitality division needs trainers who understand that exceptional service begins with exceptional character. Technical skills can be taught. Integrity cannot." Savannah stared at him in disbelief. "Sir, I have never managed a restaurant." Vincent smiled. Neither had many of our finest leaders before someone recognized their potential. Tears gathered in her eyes. But this time, they came from gratitude rather than humiliation. She thought about the photograph resting inside her apron pocket and the words her mother had written years before. "Never let another person's opinion become your mirror." For the first time in a long while, those words felt lighter to carry. As Vincent prepared to leave, he paused beside Savannah one last time. "Do not allow anyone to convince you that your value must be earned," he said softly. "Character already makes you invaluable." The dining room remained silent once more, but now it was a silence filled with respect instead of judgment, and every person present understood that the most meaningful transformations rarely begin with power. They begin with the simple decision to honor another human being. The following Tuesday morning, Savannah stood outside the headquarters of Moretti Hospitality Group wearing the only navy blue blazer she owned. She had borrowed the matching shoes from a neighbor and spent the bus ride wondering whether someone would realize she did not belong in a building filled with polished executives and glass conference rooms overlooking the Chicago skyline. Old doubts have a way of arriving before new opportunities. Yet as the elevator doors opened onto the executive floor, She remembered the photograph tucked safely inside her handbag and the sentence written in her mother's careful handwriting. Never let another person's opinion become your mirror. The receptionist welcomed her by name before escorting her into a spacious conference room where Vincent was already waiting with several senior leaders from the company. There were no intimidating speeches, no impossible interviews, and no trick questions. Instead, Vincent invited Savannah to describe the most difficult customer she had ever served and what she had learned from that experience. She answered honestly. She spoke about patience, listening before reacting, and refusing to let another person's bad day become an excuse to lose her own character. When she finished, the room remained quiet for several thoughtful seconds. One executive smiled and said, "You have just explained our entire customer service philosophy better than most training manuals." Savannah looked toward Vincent with genuine surprise. He simply nodded. "Experience teaches procedures," he said. "Character teaches leadership." By the end of the meeting, Savannah accepted an offer to help develop employee training focused on empathy, professionalism, and respectful workplace culture while continuing her education with full company support. She called her mother before leaving the building. Lorraine answered on the second ring. As Savannah shared everything that had happened, neither of them spoke for several moments afterward because joyful tears often say what words cannot. Weeks later, Belladonna Steakhouse felt different. Employees greeted one another more warmly. Managers spent more time supporting their teams than protecting appearances. New training sessions began with a simple reminder displayed on every screen. Every guest deserves excellent service. Every employee deserves equal respect. Several members of the staff later admitted that one evening had changed the way they viewed leadership forever. Even Daniel Mercer wrote Savannah a sincere letter accepting responsibility for his choices and thanking her for responding with grace instead of bitterness. She quietly accepted the apology, believing that changed hearts were always more valuable than public humiliation. One autumn afternoon, Vincent stopped by the community center where Savannah still volunteered every Sunday. He found her serving meals with the same smile she had carried through the hardest night of her career. Nothing about her kindness had changed after receiving recognition because it had never depended on recognition in the first place. As they watched families gather around long tables filled with laughter, Vincent asked, "Why did you keep coming here even after everything changed?" Savannah smiled gently. "Because people should never become invisible simply because the world is busy looking somewhere else." Vincent looked across the room, then back at the woman whose quiet strength had transformed far more than a single restaurant. "The world noticed your appearance," he said softly. "I noticed your character." Savannah's eyes reflected quiet gratitude rather than pride. Outside, golden afternoon sunlight stretched across the sidewalk as children laughed in the distance and neighbors greeted one another by name. It was an ordinary day, yet it carried an extraordinary reminder that true dignity does not demand attention. It quietly changes every life willing to recognize it. And that day, everyone who had witnessed those events remembered what respect truly looks like.